Good evening, everyone, and welcome to anyone who may be new to us, and welcome back to those who may have joined us previously. This evening, we will be discussing cholesterol, the real story. We have an educational and entertaining session in store for you. Our presenter today is Brian Sanderoff. Brian is a pharmacist that used to own and operate 2 pharmacies in downtown Baltimore. After practicing traditional pharmacy for 10 years, he came to the realization that dispensing maintenance medicines for chronic diseases wasn't actually helping. The diseases were not really going away, as evidenced by the fact that people had to continue to take their medicines. At this point, Brian began a journey of exploration that led him to further explore health and disease in a completely different way. The philosophy that he has developed comes from a unique blend of scientific data, practical experience involving thousands of patients in his private practice, coupled with an ability to understand how nature works and how better to live in sync with nature. Brian is the guiding force behind the Wellbeing Healing Center and Holistic Pharmacy. At the center, they specialize in helping people better understand the true cause of disease and discomfort and empowers them to create positive change and ultimately take control of their own good health. I encourage you to sit back, relax, and listen with an open mind. While some of the information you hear tonight may fly in the face of conventional wisdom, Brian does a great job of educating the audience, me included, on this issue. Just a few housekeeping issues. You will be muted during the webinar, but you have the ability to ask questions during the presentation. Just type your question in the question box, and we will be able to see it. We will try to get to as many questions as possible within the time frame of the webinar. In addition, you are always welcome to get in touch with Brian directly through the Wellbeing GPS website for more questions. Just go to www.wellbeinggps.com and click on the Contact Us button. Additionally, our live webinars are recorded and will be available along with a PowerPoint presentation for you to share or to enjoy at your convenience. Again, please go to www.wellbeinggps.com, your navigation tool to being well. And in just a moment, I will turn it over to Brian Sanderoff.
Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it, and really look very forward to sharing this information with everybody, and it's great seeing all you guys online. I love seeing a lot of names here that I recognize and know, and I do appreciate the support and you guys all being here. So tonight's topic is cholesterol, and I have to tell you, and I will apologize right in the beginning, that some of this gets a little technical, and I try to distill the information down to make it understandable, and yet still it does get a little bit technical in understanding really what's going on with cholesterol. And so again, I kind of apologize in advance for the technical nature of some of the things tonight. And I do encourage your questions both here while we're doing the webinar, and then also anytime you are welcome to call or contact me through the website, and I'll be happy to do that. So yeah, here we go. Cholesterol, the real story. So this is how this whole sort of idea of cholesterol being related to clogging of the arteries and heart attacks really started. And this goes back to the beginning of the 1900s. And basically, researchers took some rabbits and they fed it meat. And what they found is after those rabbits ate that meat that contained cholesterol in the food, and they sacrificed those rabbits and they looked at their arteries and their hearts, they found that they were starting to lay down plaques, that there was blockages starting. And so they said, okay, look, there it is. It's that's it. It's the cholesterol in our diet that's causing heart disease. Well, what they didn't recognize was that rabbits are actually vegetarian and they're not supposed to eat meat. And so it's not necessarily a reasonable thing to say, okay, well, that's the same with people as well, because we weren't intended to eat meat. And so we can't take that, that fact that that's what happened with rabbits, that will happen with us. And so that was the very beginning of this supposed correlation between cholesterol, our cholesterol levels, our diet, and heart disease. And so it really begs the question, number one, where does cholesterol come from? Well, some of it comes from our diet, and, depending on who we are and what our genetics are, anywhere between, say, 15 and 20% of the cholesterol comes from our diet. And, of course, the rest of it comes from our body. The liver actually makes cholesterol. This should be a clue that I'll keep going back to as we go through this talk. Here's an interesting note, though, is that when you decrease your cholesterol intake from your diet, your body will increase cholesterol manufacturing in the liver, and vice versa. If you increase your cholesterol from your diet, then the body will decrease it. And so that, again, should be a really important clue. And I also want to point out that cholesterol has actually really been demonized for the past 30 or 40 years, and there are many of us who don't even have cholesterol issues who may have made choices to alter your diet, our diets, based on that. Here's a prime example of it. How many people out there don't eat eggs because they think it's bad for them, cholesterol-wise and otherwise? I know that there's a lot of people that happens to. Okay, so 15, 20% from our diet, the rest from our body. Well, if your body makes cholesterol, and if you're not getting cholesterol in your diet, then your body actually increases the making of cholesterol, well, doesn't it make sense that actually it's something that your body needs? And I have to tell you that the body makes cholesterol for some very, very important reasons. Number one, cholesterol is a component in the cell membrane of every cell in your body, and that has very important implications. That plays an important role with what goes in and out of cells. And things going in and out of the cell, and I'm talking particularly about certain minerals, ions we call them, sodium or potassium or magnesium or calcium. The transport of these little ions, these electrical charged ions going across that cell membrane is what allows for muscle contraction and nerve conduction. And in essence, that's what allows us to be animals that move around as opposed to plants that don't. That transfer of ions across those membranes. And so cholesterol is very important for that. And if it's not there, then we don't have the ability to do that. We would end up, not being able to contract muscles or have nerve conduction. Nerves talk to each other. That cholesterol also plays a role with protecting against oxidative damage. So when we get exposed to things that could cause damage to cells or parts of cells, the cholesterol actually works to help protect that. We also use cholesterol to make certain things like vitamin D. And so when our vitamin D levels are low, our body will even make a little bit more cholesterol to try to prime the pump in making more vitamin D if possible. And many other hormones, including the sex hormone and cortisol, which is a hormone of stress. And so cholesterol plays a very important role with the body being able to respond appropriately to stress as well. So here are some other fun facts about cholesterol that are important to understand, and will play a role with all of this. So number one, the brain comprises only 2% of the body's total weight, but it actually contains 25% of the body's cholesterol. Now, I know that me talking about cholesterol and ultimately telling you that looking at your cholesterol and altering your cholesterol will make you live longer, me telling you that that fact is not a fact, that's actually a falsehood, boy, that flies in the face of conventional wisdom. Not just medicine, but, society in general, because we've got all of this stuff that's geared around us paying attention to our cholesterol with the idea that if we do, we'll live longer and we'll live healthier. And I'm telling you that's not true, and I know that that's a hard fact to swallow sometimes when if you go to your doctor tomorrow and you say, hey, I heard this guy on this webinar talk about cholesterol, and he said, paying attention to cholesterol really doesn't do anything for you, the doctor will say, no, that's wrong. And you'll have to try to get the doctor to explain why that's wrong and see if it makes sense after you hear what it is tonight. But here's common sense. If 25% of our cholesterol is in our brain, it must be really important to help the brain function properly, to help cells, nerve cells, brain cells communicate with each other properly. Cholesterol sulfate helps with the metabolism of fat. So cholesterol will get sulfated on the skin, meaning that it has like a sort of a sulfur molecule that's attached to it, and then it has other very important effects. And one of them is to help metabolize fats. One of them is actually it plays an important role with immune system in the gut. And let's remember that 70% of immunity happens in our gut. And the other fact I want to point out, because this will be important later, is that it takes 25 chemical steps in your body to make cholesterol. That, from one piece to another piece, adding another piece, enzyme, this, that, 25 individual steps to actually make cholesterol. And again, that will become important as we go a little bit further into the discussion. So let's understand the pieces of cholesterol. Not everybody knows that there's two types of cholesterol. There's the supposedly bad cholesterol, which is called LDL, and there's the supposedly good cholesterol, which is called HDL. And let's talk about that. First of all, LDL. LDL is not cholesterol. LDL is basically a transport unit that is responsible for taking fat-soluble things and transporting them through the blood. Because if something's fat-soluble, it can't be in the blood without sort of being protected or, encased. And so really what LDL is, just this transport unit, sort of think of it as a submarine that goes around in your blood and it delivers things to your cells, fats, cholesterol, vitamin D, other fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin E or K or A. So basically it's just a transport system. It's a container, and it transports these things to all the tissues in the body. Now, the outer shell of LDL is made up of cholesterol and proteins and fats. Also within LDL is another protein which is called ApoB. And this little important protein enables LDL to actually go around and deliver the goods to all the cells the way it's intended to do so. And all of this is made in the liver, by the way. And sugar has a role here as well. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail. But I want to point out that sugar has the ability to put a kink in this system, this delivery system that I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking about glucose. I'm talking about fructose as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So that's the LDL story. First of all, it's not cholesterol, even though we think of it as cholesterol. It's actually this transport unit now. It's made of cholesterol, and it has cholesterol in it, but it has other things in it as well. So what is HDL? Well, HDL is a different kind, supposedly high-density lipoprotein. It's a different sort of container, and its job is actually to gather up cholesterol and return it back to the liver where it can get used for, reuse. And I also just want to say a note about numbers in heart disease, because later you're going to hear me talk about statistics and how cholesterol really is not any sort of good indicator or predictor of your future heart health, or your current heart health for that matter. But with HDL, that's the one indicator that really numbers in heart disease do jive. And so it is fairly clear that the higher your HDL is, the less likely you are to have sort of cardiovascular disease. And the reverse is important as well. So the lower your HDL is, the more likely you could have that tendency towards cardiovascular disease. And again, that doesn't mean that we should go out and try to invent a drug that just raises HDL for that purpose. What that really means is that people that have habits that lead to elevated HDL are ones that have better heart health. Talk about exercise and some other things that we'll talk about a little bit later, if that makes sense to you, hopefully. Okay, so what's the real determinant factor here? And it actually is particle size. So this is the way it works, and I'm going to try, and this is where we get a little bit technical, and again, I apologize for this, but this is the way it works, okay? So once LDL, which again, container that contains cholesterol, and remember, every cell in your body needs cholesterol. The cell membrane is made of cholesterol. Things that transport in and out of cells rely on cholesterol being there. So the LDL delivers cholesterol and all of the rest of the goods, which again are fats, vitamin D, and other fat-soluble vitamins. Once it delivers the goods, it becomes what's known as small, dense LDL. And the idea is that it's supposed to then be returned to the liver, where the liver will break down that small, dense LDL into its parts again and reuse it. But what happens is that this small, dense LDL molecule gets attached to sugars. Or another way to put this is sugars will interfere with this process happening the way it's supposed to. Now, there's a term that's called glycation, and what that means basically is that the sugar can attach itself to a protein and one way or another alter the way that protein works. And so I talked about the very important protein called ApoB, which allows LDL to go around and deliver, the goods. Well, it's very susceptible to glycation from sugars. And so if we have high levels of sugar, then LDL can't make it back to the liver. And when that happens, macrophages take up the task of recycling the LDL and grabbing the cholesterol that's left in there out of it and trying to give it back to HDL to go return it to the liver. Macrophages are a part of the immune system, and they're extremely skilled at extracting cholesterol from damaged LDL and inserting it into HDL. And so the more they can do that, then the higher your HDL level is, or the denser it is, the higher number, which is, again, as I told you, a healthy thing. But this happens in the artery walls, especially around the heart. And so what happens is these small, dense LDL molecules get trapped in the artery wall. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the very beginning of the very complicated process that leads to clogging of the arteries. It's not about your cholesterol. It's about the particle size of your cholesterol. And that's what should be tested. And we'll talk about that in a little bit and how you can have that tested and ask your doctor for that as well. So let's talk about that sugar connection. Very important to understand. It really all comes down to liver function. Guess what the liver's function is? It has a lot of functions. You know it's supposed to detox. As I just told you, it's supposed to help, make LDL. And these other things, cholesterol, but one of the other functions of the liver is it's responsible for getting sugar and fructose out of the bloodstream and actually converting it to fat. And so the liver creates LDL particles, it produces cholesterol, and it's also important for breaking down sugars. Now, the reason I put fructose on the slide there is that fructose takes a lot more energy by the liver to break it down and turn it into fat. And so another way to thinking about that is the liver has the potential to get overwhelmed when our blood sugar is too high. And that is the crux of the problem here. And this is why sugar really becomes the much bigger risk factor for heart disease, regardless of what your cholesterol numbers are. If you have what medicine considers normal cholesterol and your body has too much sugar, which distracts the liver, which allows for faulty LDL to be made, which makes it more susceptible to glycation from that sugar that's already going around in the blood, that is the risk factor that starts clogging of the arteries. And so regardless of what your cholesterol numbers are, if you've got a problem with your sugar, and many of us do, that's the risk factor. And this explains perfectly why nearly half the people going into the emergency room having a heart attack have had cholesterol below 200 for their entire lives. Because it's not about the cholesterol, it's about the particle size, and it's about this process of sugars. That makes sense, right? Makes sense to me. So how do we measure cholesterol properly? Okay. The first one has to do, actually, I'm going to stop for a second because I see a question and didn't understand the macrophages process where LDL gets trapped in the artery walls. Okay, so macrophages are part of the immune system. And when there's damaged, small, dense LDL that can't make it back to the liver, the job then falls to the macrophages to do that job. And that job happens inside the lining of the blood vessels. And so you've got this damaged, small, dense LDL in the lining of the blood vessels, and macrophages are there trying to break that down. Their job is to take the cholesterol from that and then give it to HDL so HDL can return it back to the liver. And that is what is the beginning of the blocking of the arteries. That's what starts atherosclerosis, which is that, that plaque that gets there, because it happens in the lining of the blood vessels. So there's like a little bump there, and then that bump gets a little bit bigger, and then the body detects that, things get attached to it. The body tries to protect it by calcifying it, and that's how it ends up becoming I hope that clears that up for you. You also asked about the relationship to hormones and cortisol. That wasn't clear. And I'll make that clear a little bit later in the talk. Had a question from Becky, who said, high cholesterol runs in my family and my doctor has me on simvastatin. How do you know if you should take it or not? At the end of tonight's talk, Becky, if you think that you don't have more questions to ask your doctor about that, you'll have a better answer. You'll have a better understanding of that. And I'm going to talk specifically about the statins and what the statistics really say. And I know what your doctor has told you. I know the statistics that you've heard. And when you hear the statistics that I give you, which are the same statistics, just framed in a different way, then you may look at that and say, wait a second, this is not the way I want to go. What I want to do is really concentrate on my sugar. Okay, thanks for those questions, guys. I appreciate it. And keep them coming. So you can measure through the regular blood test, and what you get from that is you get your LDL, your HDL, your triglycerides. Actually, they only measure the HDL. The LDL is actually calculated on that test, and you'll see on your blood test it says LDL and then in parentheses CALC afterwards, and so it's not even actually really measured. But it doesn't look at particle size. There is another blood test which is called the VAP test, V-A-P. You want to if you want to learn more about this, or if you want to get more information to your doctor about this, you can send him to thevaptest.com. Just put a .com after what you see there. And what that does is it measures all the same things, but it also measures the particle size. And that way you can find out how much at risk you really are. Because if you have a whole bunch of small, dense LDL molecules, you're at risk. And if you have some, a lot of fat, fluffy, or buoyant molecules that aren't, that are more on that spectrum, then you're not at risk, regardless of what your numbers are. And this is really an important, thing to understand. Here's the interesting thing about this. On my radio show, probably 10 years ago, we started talking about this test and sort of predicted that within a year or two, this would be the gold standard. And it's not. It's still not. And I don't understand that. I really don't understand it one bit, because the science is clear about this. And here's the other kicker. Your insurance pays for this just like the other one, and your insurance pays the lab the exact same amount. So it doesn't cost anybody anything different. It's just more and more usable information. And I do encourage you to get this test done when you go to your doctor, and he or she says he wants to get the your cholesterol checked. So there's some other blood tests that are also important for you to be able to really more accurately predict what your future heart health has in store for you. So two of them have to do with sugar and how your body handles sugar. One of them is called HbA1c, and this stands for hemoglobin A1c. And what it is a measure of your blood sugar, what it's been every minute of every day for the past 3 or 4 months, as opposed to what a snapshot is. Because right now you get first of all, you fast, right? So you, don't eat anything. You wake up in the morning, don't eat anything. You go, you get your blood drawn, and they say, all right, your blood sugar right now is 89. Well, and then they say, okay, that's fine, that's great. Well, that doesn't tell us what your blood sugar has done going up and down over the past 3 or 4 months. And again, that's really an important issue, because as I told you, having that high level of blood sugar is what actually ends up damaging the LDL, which is really the risk factor here. And so having your HbA1c measured is important. And if you go to your doctor and say, hey, I want that measured, and the doctor says, no, we only do that for diabetics, you say, you know what? I'm pre-diabetic. Because the truth is every one of us is pre-diabetic. And it's absolutely reasonable to have this done to know what's going on with your heart. Number two, and this one is even more important, is fasting insulin. And the reason that we like this is because it gives us a sense of your body's response to that sugar. So your blood sugar actually may be even and normal, even though you're having blood sugar spikes, and your body's just taking care of it very efficiently. And it does that by releasing insulin. So when we look at your fasting insulin level, we find this process happening much earlier in the process, if that makes sense to you. Another one is called CRP, C-reactive protein, and this is a measure of inflammation, which again is a very key precursor or underpinning to every chronic disease out there, including cardiovascular disease. And so I think in 2 months the webinar is about inflammation, and we're going to get into this in much more detail. But the HS before that stands for high sensitivity, and so again, having this as routine to be able to help predict what's going on heart-wise. Homocysteine is another one. This is an amino acid which has the ability to sort of damage the inside of blood vessels. Kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, but the inside of your blood vessels are supposed to be smooth as glass, and when there gets a little scratch or a little chink in there, that's when the body wants to try to repair it, and again, can be the beginning of that process of clogging the arteries. And then the last one is vitamin D, and this one is not given enough respect. I can tell you that your vitamin D levels being at a certain point is key to getting your genes to express themselves in a more positive way. And everybody out there should know what your vitamin D level is. And I've got a whole bunch of information. I did a great webinar about this a few months ago, and so it's on the archive, and I would encourage you to go listen to that because it talks about it in much more detail. But your doctor should be testing your vitamin D levels as well. Let's see. So I have a question from Becky again. It says, can you take accurate VAP test while on simvastatin, or should you be off of it for a while? It's a good question. It's accurate for what's going on in your body right now. And so if you're on a statin drug and your particle size is good, you've got more of the large buoyant ones and less of the small dense ones, that's a good thing. Let's not just make the assumption that it's the statin drug that actually caused that that condition to be there. It may be that you never needed to be on it in the first place and that it was just never measured. So, no, you don't want to get off of that. You want to know what's going on with it right now. Good question. Appreciate that. Here's another one. I've had a VAP test done and was shown to have a slightly elevated small particle LDL. I was also told that elevated small particle LDL is mostly genetic. No, that is not true at all. There is a genetic component to it, but what that means really is that your genes could express themselves in one way, and maybe if that's your tendency, you'll have more of those, and your genes could express themselves in a positive way, and you won't have those. What are the determinants that make your genes express themselves in one way versus another? Diet, exercise, lifestyle, coping mechanisms, how you deal with stress, and those are the things, Becky, that Tony, that you can control yourself. And so that's how we get away from ending up suffering from the same things that our parents did. And there are some supplements that also help encourage more of the large buoyant ones, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Good question. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, all right, let's get to it. Let's talk about the statins. I love this a little bit because it's important to understand this. So here's the claim. The claim is basically that if you take a statin drug, it's going to lower your incidence of having a major cardiovascular event, talking about a heart attack there. And there was a study, one of the more recent studies from 2006 that's called a meta-study or a meta-analysis, and it looked at 7 of the drug trials with the statin drugs that entailed nearly 43,000 patients. So not a small study, looked at a lot of people over 3 to 5 years. And this is what the results of that study supposedly said, that it showed a 29% decreased risk of having a major cardiovascular event, 29%. So basically a third. That seems like a pretty good claim. But here's what you have to understand is that there is a difference between relative risk and actual risk. And the difference has to do with the fact that out of those 43,000 people, really not that many people had heart attacks in the first place. And so if only a handful had heart attacks and then you went to a smaller handful, a third less, it sounds like a big change. But the truth is that it wasn't that big of a change. And so there's a completely different way to look at the stats, the information, that's called number needed to treat. And this asks just a very simple question. What it says is, from the statistics, how many people do you need to treat for how long of a period of time for one person to get a benefit? It's really a simple question. And as far as I'm concerned, every one of our doctors should be asking that question about the results of all these studies. So that same study, that 2006 meta-analysis that I just told you about that supposedly showed a 29% decreased risk, this is what the number needed to treat comes from those numbers. You need to treat 60 people for nearly 4.5 years with a statin drug for one person to avoid having a heart attack. I'm going to say that again. 60 people for 4.3 years to protect one single heart attack. Now, Becky, you had asked me, what about that? If those are the statistics, does that really seem like a risk, like a reasonable thing to do for the cost and also the side effects, which I'm about to talk to you about? So it doesn't seem to make that much sense anymore, right? Okay. I also want to point out that no statin drug, no study on statins has ever shown a reduction in all-cause mortality, meaning that taking a statin drug does not change funeral rates one bit, maybe just the opposite, and it definitely affects quality of life in a negative way. No study ever showing a decrease in all-cause mortality. And isn't that why we want to take these drugs in the first place? Because of the promise that we're actually going to live longer and healthier? So I think that's an important statistic to understand. Okay, so how do the statins work? Well, there's a chemical in the liver that's called HMG-CoA reductase. This is an enzyme that helps in the production of cholesterol. And so the statin drugs are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. They stop that enzyme from activating. It also happens early on in that 25-step process. And the reason I told you about that little fun fact that said it takes 25 steps to actually make cholesterol, the important fact here is that HMG-CoA reductase happens very early in that process. And so that process isn't needed just to make cholesterol. It's needed to make other things as well, like coenzyme Q10, which is a very important nutrient. So when we interfere with HMG-CoA reductase doing its job, we stop the body, the liver, from being able to make coenzyme Q10, which is a cofactor that's needed for every cell in your body to make energy. Your body cannot convert sugar into ATP without CoQ10, coenzyme Q10 being there. And also, coenzyme Q10 also helps protect the cells. Number two, there's a protein called G protein, and that helps cells communicate with each other under stressful conditions. And again, you need HMG-CoA reductase to be able to make that G protein. So when you take a statin drug, you interfere with that G protein also. So there are some negative effects of the statin drugs. There are the ones that they tell you about, and Becky, you had asked about being on the simvastatin, and so you know that your doctor has to take your blood on a fairly regular basis to look at your liver and see whether it's damaging your liver or not. And we also know that it causes muscle problems, and we all either have experienced ourselves or know somebody who has been on a statin drug and had to stop taking it because of the muscle pain. But there's a whole host of side effects and other effects that happen from taking statin drugs that they never really tell you about. There's a list of a few of them right there: heart failure, diabetes, arthritis, neuropathy, memory problems. And it all makes perfect sense because your body needs cholesterol for cells to communicate with each other. Your body needs cholesterol to be able to transport vitamins and fats and other things to your cells. And when we interfere with that process, the body can't function properly. And it shows up all different ways. Which way would show up in one individual person is really difficult to predict because that depends on your genetics and where your weaknesses are. Early studies with the statin drugs show that, that they cause cancer. And I can see why that would happen because the immune system can't work right without being fueled properly and without being able to communicate with other cells properly as well. So here's the real big question. Should we look to lower cholesterol in the first place? And so the answer comes in understanding basic biochemistry like we're talking about tonight. I want to tell you about a recently reported study that went on for 17 years. And during the 17 years, looked at a bunch of people as they aged. And they measured the aging process three ways: by frailty, by mental decline, and by overall longevity. They looked at those three factors to determine, sort of quality of life and what happened with people. This isn't with any drugs or anything. This is just with cholesterol levels. And what they did is they looked at three things with people: their cholesterol levels, their body's ability to make cholesterol, and their body's ability to absorb cholesterol through their gut. So that means their body making cholesterol, that's liver, and absorb cholesterol through their gut, meaning the parts of cholesterol that come from your diet. And what they noticed in this 17-year-long study was that the lower your cholesterol, your ability to make cholesterol, and your ability to absorb cholesterol is, the higher you are on the scales of measuring frailty, mental decline, and overall longevity. And so that really just answers it right then and there. It says that the answer is no. You should not be looking to lower your cholesterol. And even if you look at the study, the statistics that came from the Framingham study, which is this big study that started back in the 40s, actually, where they tried to prove that, that there was a link between diet, cholesterol, and cardiovascular disease. Even when you look at those raw statistics, the analysis shows that when you lower your cholesterol, you actually don't live as long. That's simple. So here's the question that we should be asking, and that is, how do we age better in regard to heart health? So first of all, if you are going to look at cholesterol, you better look at the cholesterol, at the particle size, because that's really the important thing. And there are some things that can be helpful in making more of the fat fluffy molecules and less of the small dense ones. There's a lot of things, but as far as supplements go, fish oil and niacin, very important B vitamin. Both of those have been shown to increase particle size, which is what you want. So one way or another, they actually, sort of helps protect those LDL molecules. How about in regards to helping your body handle sugar? If you want to age more gracefully, not just in regards to heart health, but overall health as well, you better get your body to handle sugar better. So number one, that means that you need to cut down on those processed and refined sugars. And that doesn't mean just cakes and candies and donuts. It also means breads and pastas and cereals. The grains that we eat and the way that we process those grains, they're just like candy bars to most of us in the way our bodies work. And again, I explained this in much more detail in another webinar that I did, I think, last month about weight loss and how these grains just are not really, we were never intended to eat grains the way we do today. Maybe a different way to put it is, we have not been eating grains the way we do today long enough for our body to have made genetic changes to handle it. That's why we have a problem with cardiovascular disease. That's why we have a problem with diabetes. That's why we have a problem with obesity. It's because of those processed and refined carbs, and those really need to get out of our diet. And for God's sake, please get high fructose corn syrup out of your diet. Fructose requires the liver to work 13 times as hard as it does for glucose in handling that. Those commercials on TV that say, oh, it's natural and it comes from corn and it's good for you, couldn't be further from the truth. And it's one of the reasons why we have the cardiovascular disease and the obesity problem in this country today. So get the high fructose corn syrup out of your diet. And you would be surprised how many foods have high fructose corn syrup in them, ones that you wouldn't expect it to. So if you're not making your own foods, if it's coming out of a bottle or a jar or a package, look at that. Salad dressings, you wouldn't think you'd have high fructose corn syrup in there. It does. And now companies are starting to, find other ways to list sugars so that it doesn't look like there's sugars in there. So I've seen packages that on the front of it says no high fructose corn syrup, and you look at the ingredients, and the second ingredient is corn syrup, and the fourth ingredient is modified corn syrup. And so they're finding different ways to try to trick us into thinking that we're eating something that's healthy and we're not. Number three is, you have to learn to use up the sugars that you do have in your diet more efficiently, and that comes down to exercise. I'll talk about that in a second. So here, exercise. Again, how to age better in regard to heart health. You have to use up those sugars. That's what exercise does. And sugar gets stored in different ways in your body. So if you were starting from scratch and you had something that had some sugar in it, and again, you should have some sugar in your diet. Carbohydrates in the forms of fruits and vegetables and, legumes and nuts and seeds, those are good carbohydrates. And those are sugars that your body that won't cause a rapid rise in your blood sugar, and will your body will be able to handle it much more efficiently or differently. So if you were starting from scratch and your body got some sugar in it, the first place the body wants to store that sugar is in the form of glycogen, first in your liver, then in your muscles. Once those glycogen stores are used up, those storage areas are used up, then your body will want to store that sugar for tomorrow as stored energy. We have another name for that. That's called fat. And so when you exercise, you use up your glycogen stores first. You exercise for about 20 minutes. You use up all the glycogen that you have for energy in your liver and your muscles. Then the next time you eat, those storage units are empty and your body can use that. So that's why exercise is so important. Another interesting fact, and that is that when you exercise and you use your muscles, you make a waste product which is called lactic acid. And those of you who have gone up and exercised hard and then you have sore muscles afterwards, that's because those muscle cells are sort of saturated in this lactic acid, this waste product. Nature is amazing, and the body doesn't do anything by accident. And so that lactic acid, as it turns out, is a very efficient fuel for cardiac tissue. Starting to believe that that's why exercise is so good for your heart, because when you exercise, you actually make this lactic acid, which the heart can use for energy without having to use sugar. And so that's sort of a byproduct of exercising on a regular basis. And again, exercise has been shown to help increase those large buoyant molecules. So again, Becky, you had asked about that. Okay, how do you age better in regard to heart health? Stress. We got to do something more about stress. And so, when you have increased cortisol levels, that has a negative effect on genetic expression. When you're under stress, your body is preparing to, fix damage. Again, back to when we were cavemen. So a saber-toothed tiger jumps in the cave, and your body is preparing for the mauling that's going to happen, or that what you're going to have to do to run away from that or fight that. And one of those responses is that it increases your blood sugar because the body figures you're going to need some more fuel right away to fix things. Well, that blood sugar increase is one of the things that, again, attaches those sugars or causes that glycation, which damages those LDL, which helps turn them into the small dense, blah, blah, blah. And so that plays a very important role with that. And I also cannot stress enough the importance of proper sleep, not just getting sleep, but when you sleep. We're intended to live more in sync with nature, and we're intended to be asleep more towards when the sun goes down, not after we've watched the late show and the late news and Sports Center until 1 in the morning. And so trying to get to bed earlier, even if you only get 6 hours of sleep at night, you will benefit more from getting 6 hours of sleep from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. than you would from 12 to 6. How else do we live better? All right, some supplements, as I spoke about. Fish oil, very important. When you go back to that list of blood tests that you should, ask your doctor to do, fish oil affects a lot of those things. It affects your cells' ability to communicate with each other, which affects sugar in a positive way. It's anti-inflammatory, so it positively affects C-reactive protein. It helps, make more of those fat, fluffy molecules and less of those small, dense ones. So fish oil is very important. Vitamin D3, can't stress it enough, and I would just encourage you again to go to that other webinar and listen to it, because it's dynamite information and it's something that every one of us should know. And after you listen to that, you're going to go to your doctor and say, hey, why aren't you checking my vitamin D level? Ubiquinol, this is the active form of coenzyme Q10. And so especially if you are on a statin drug, you should, you should take this to protect yourself and give your body what you're interfering with your body being able to make on its own is. Anti-inflammatory is very important. One of my favorite products is by a company called New Chapter, and the product is called Zyflamend, and it's a group of herbs that are all anti-inflammatory. And really, want to talk about longevity and genetic expression. That's a good one. Let's see. Got a question here. Can exercise create stress? Yes, and he says I have sleep issues when I do intense exercise, and so yes, exercise can create stress, and so there are different ways to exercise that stress is not overwhelming to your adrenal glands and your system. And if you're not recovering well from your exercise, then we need to put some attention to your adrenals so that your body can withstand the exercise better, so that you benefit from it more. And I'll also tell you that when it comes to exercise, we weren't designed to do long, extended bouts of exercise without altering the pace of that. So in other words, what I'm saying is for those of us that are runners, and again, I'm not saying don't go out and run, but back when we were cavemen, and again, that's how our body still works, if you went out and you ran for 6 miles without stopping, your body was preparing to die. In essence, what you were telling your body from the outside world is that whatever that animal is that's chasing me is not stopping. And that thing that we call runner's high, which is like an explosion of endorphins, is actually your body preparing to meet it then. That's what a runner's high is. And so the proper way to exercise is interval training, doing spurts of intense exercise, in between lighter exercise as well. And you can do that on any machine or any way that you would like to exercise. So that's that one. Let's see. Tabby says, this info will take some time to absorb, so much I have never heard. Yep. Listen, Tabby, I encourage you to not listen to what I said and say, okay, wow, that's that's it. I want you to go out and do your own research, and I want you to educate yourself about this. And then I'm always happy to have a conversation with you about it, but I'm not like your doctor. I'm not saying, hey, this is the way it is, and this is what you should do. You're an adult, and you'll make your own decisions. I want you to understand the full ramification of those decisions. And when you do, whatever decision you make is the right decision for you. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. Another one, what's the name of the New Chapter anti-inflammatory supplement again? It is called Zyflamend, Z-Y-F-L-A-M-E-N-D. And I don't do these webinars to be a commercial for you guys to buy stuff from me. And that being said, I'll tell you, when you go to the website, you'll see the entire line of New Chapter products at 40% off the suggested retail. You won't find a better price. So there, I did make it a commercial after all. Let's see. Here's another question. Sorry, my HDL always stays low. Most it has ever reached is 34, which is low. Now it is less than 20. I have not been taking statin drugs for a couple years, and I even stopped taking Zetia, which is good because that's also useless. What can I do? I'm hoping that this will work. I recently started exercising regularly, eat avocados daily, take smoothies daily, take caffeine only 3 to 4 times in a week, and supplements like my vitamin D, Zyflamend, and New Chapter. It can be a little, thanks for the question again, and I really appreciate all the questions from you guys. It can be a little bit more complicated because there are some genetic factors there, and there are some outside factors that can help move that HDL higher, and there's no question that we want that to happen. But as important is, what is the state and the particle size of your LDL? That's an important thing to know, and when we see what that is, then we know how much more we have to do to try to do that. There are specific nutrients that are out there that can help raise HDL, including fish oil. So, and including, analyzing the fats that come in your diet as well, which is another part of that. So, thanks for the question again. So, here's to wrap it all up. Number one, the number one killer is not heart disease. It is not cancer. It is not terrorism. The number one killer is misinformation. The number one killer is all of that stuff that we hear out there from medicine, from the media, and from the government that tell us that we should be on a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. Just the opposite is true. Just the opposite is true. So the number one killer really is misinformation, and hopefully we're doing some things to help with that. And it's not really about cholesterol. Let's remember that. And lowering your cholesterol does not benefit you one bit, regardless of how you do that. So you know what? You can take some herbs that would lower your cholesterol. If you just do that, that wouldn't necessarily help you either. What is really important is undertaking the habits that will normalize your cholesterol. And that's really the way it goes. All right. So this is where you can go listen to the past webinars as well. Those are some of the ones that are on the list there. And there's some future ones coming up. Let's get to the rest of these questions. And let's see. My husband and I are on statins. How do we proceed? Boy, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, Dory. Really, what I recommend is that you took the first step tonight. You educated yourself about it. The next step is to properly evaluate what's going on for you. And so that means that you get that list of tests done. You don't just rely on the cholesterol that the doctor told you. You get that list of tests done, and then you sit down with somebody who can help you evaluate that. I'm happy to do that for you, and there are many other practitioners who can do that for you as well. So once we know what the particle size is, once we know, what your C-reactive protein and your homocysteine and your sugar things are and your vitamin D, then we know what steps to take to lower your risk if the risk is really there. And ideally, that would eliminate the need for needing to be on that statin drug in the first place. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. The guy who asked about the HDL says, I have 0 calcifications in my arteries. Case in point. That's exactly it. See, if we just look at your numbers, we say, wow, you're a risk factor. We've got to do something about that. But when we look further, we find out that maybe you're not at risk. And maybe that, low HDL is not all of that important, or not all of that dread is the way to put it, because all of those other factors are where they should be. And so that's an important thing to understand as well. Let's see. Tabby asks, any way to get the presentation to give it to friends and family who won't sit through a whole hour? You know, that's a hard one. They can come and, you know, get this in bits and pieces. Before long, there'll be a protocol that is on our website that'll talk about this in abbreviated terms, and maybe that wets the whistle enough for them to be willing to sit down and then listen to the whole story. And ultimately, someone's got to be willing to want to take care of themselves. Someone needs to be willing to take care of themselves and take the time to do so. And if not, then, you know, they're going to get what they're going to get, right? Here's another question. Do you believe that it's best, and can we get these vital nutrients, i.e. vitamin D fish oil, from food rather than supplements? Yes and no. I believe it's best to do that. No, I do not believe it's possible. First of all, you don't get vitamin D from your diet at all. You get it from exposure to the sun, and that has to come from exposure to the sun in the proper time. And we don't do that. You know, we're walking, talking shade. We've been told to fear the sun. And so we just don't get enough of it. And, you know, far and away, everybody is more likely to be deficient in vitamin D than not. And so quick rule of thumb, and again, go to the vitamin D webinar to hear more about it. But quick rule of thumb is if your shadow is longer than you are when you're outside in the sun, you're not making any vitamin D from that sun. And so right now, where I am in Baltimore, at noon, the sun is still so low in the sky that my shadow is longer than I am, and I'm not making any vitamin D. Fish oil, you can't get it from your diet. If you do, you're getting lead, mercury, and PCBs, and all sorts of other stuff that you don't want. That's why the best way to do it is with the supplement. What is the best way to reduce elevated homocysteine levels? Homocysteine gets reduced by turning into methionine, which is a different amino acid, by methylating, by adding a methyl group. And so there are certain nutrients that are known as methyl donors. B6, B12, folic acid, those are all B vitamins. There's a nutrient called trimethylglycine. SAMe is a methyl donor as well. And so there's a really great product by a company called Pure Encapsulations called homocysteine factors that has a combination of those things in it. We've had good results with that. This is from Karen. Not a question, just wanted to tell you this is awesome. Oh, thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. One more question. See, many of us are on HMO, HSA. What kind of cost can we expect on these tests? If you have any sort of family history of heart disease, diabetes, or obesity, every one of these tests should be paid for by your insurance company. Now, you may have to work with your doctor who, I don't want to say that the doctor has to lie, but the doctor can certainly be creative and say, you know what, I suspect that you have metabolic syndrome. And the truth is, Tom, there's not a person that I work with in my practice. It's a rare person that I don't suspect has metabolic syndrome. And when you have those suspicions, doing every one of those tests is warranted, and insurance will pay for it. So it's just a matter of your doctor writing that code down. So if we have suspicions of cardiovascular disease, if we have suspicions of diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, or syndrome X, or insulin resistance, those are all names for the same thing, then insurance will pay for that. Listen, everybody, I really do appreciate it. First of all, I have to say thank you to Cheryl for spending her evening here moderating this. I have to say thank you for Becky for everything she does in helping to put together the PowerPoint presentations. I promised Cheryl that we would be done before American Idol hits the air, and that's about 3 minutes from now. What you see on the screen there are what's coming up on our seminars about sleep next month and inflammation in April. And Cheryl, I'm going to throw it back to you, or let you take it back from me.
Okay, Brian, thank you so much. Again, that's always great information. And I really love it when you talk about fat, fluffy molecules, because it makes me happy. I think I'm doing the right thing when I'm looking at fat foods, and I know that's not the right way to look at it, but fat, fluffy molecules just make me happy. Anyway, I appreciate you all attending tonight. Hopefully you've learned something that you didn't know before or want to find out some more information. I encourage you to check out Brian's website. It's got lots of great information, articles, past webinars. You can always contact him, and hopefully this will give you something to think about and ponder, and hopefully you'll be on the way to being better. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great night. Good night.